What is up guys, Wraec here with a new video, and today the devs have already reacted to our players, to the voices, to the people in the community talking about the Paragon buffs, and have introduced a patch to the Pioneer server with a nerfed version of those stats. So that is pretty good for everybody that wanted those nerfs. We're going to talk about it today in detail. I'm going to explain to you what they did, and we're going to talk about the reasons behind it, as I brought out quite a lengthy statement, and then we can decide whether or not we're happy with that, and I will also show you some fights with those new stats. Starting off, let's hop a little bit into the patch notes of this update, because this includes a lot of information that we will need to understand. Starting off, Rivalry stat adjustment. We have reverted the 6 Rivalry stats for Paragon heroes: damage boost, damage reduction, energy regen reduction, energy on hit, debuff, focus and resilience, to the original value from version 1.24. So what you have to know is those were the stats that were in the game since release, and they were buffed with the update, and now they are back to the original form they were before. The inspiration and intimidation stats, which were the 2 new stats that were introduced, have been reduced. Please check the in-game value for details. So here we get a nerf. If that is something the players will be happy with, that's another question. I heard many call to remove those stats entirely. Question remains if it's a good deal now that we basically get the old form of the existing stats, which are also a ton of stats that were buffed there, and just get nerf versions of inspiration and intimidation. We can argue about that. We will talk about it later. And then third, you will be able to increase the rivalry stats for Celestial and Hypergen heroes after upgrading them to Supreme Plus. The boosted stats for Celestial and Hypergen heroes upgrade to Paragon 4 will now align with those of Paragon 4 heroes from other faction. Remark: rivalry stat bonuses from Paragon tiers apply exclusively to PvP battles such as Arena and Supreme Arena. These bonuses do not affect PvE modes or PvE ranking modes, including Dream Realm, Ravage Realm, AFK stages and Duras trials. And yeah, for the last part, I have to say there were some people that were apparently confused about this. I don't know. I mean, not everybody has Paragon heroes, so I can kind of understand, but I think it was mentioned in a lot of videos, those rivalry stats are not for PvE, not for Dream Realm, not for anything like it. They are solely for PvP, Arena, Supreme Arena, Friend Battle, stuff like this, not for your PvE stuff. I even saw some players asking to revert those changes because, well, they would lose in Dream Realm. So, makes no sense. I guess, I mean, not everybody can understand it, but it is not very helpful to such a discussion if you have no idea what rivalry stats even are. So, yeah, that's the thing. Then we have a very lengthy explanation of those recent adjustments. I will give you the short version. If you want, you can stop and read it entirely. Basically what they noticed and what the reason were for those 2 new stats and their concern. Heroes like Damien and Smokey see minimal improvement from Paragon updates. So the thing is, if you have like a Supreme Plus Smokey, he essentially has all of his abilities, and upgrading him with Paragon 1, 2, 3, 4 isn't really too useful. The existing rivalry stats don't really help him too much. He doesn't really deal damage outside of his Mythic Plus ability that you rarely get to activate in PvP usually, and thus many of those rivalry stats don't really work for him, and the additional stats are not really that important. So for most support heroes, it's just not worth upgrading them. So that's the reason why they brought inspiration and wanted to give you like an additional way to get some more buffs and heals and shields and from your support heroes. So that was really the idea, which I hope, by the way, that they would have loved to hear before, because that was, I mean, what we figured out eventually. If you watched my last video, we talked about Kefra plus 4 support heroes, the power of support heroes now, and then I kind of liked how support heroes were now a little bit more important through this, and essentially they confirmed, well, that was our idea. We really wanted to make support heroes more important. So that is pretty cool, actually. But what they realized is the rivalry stat adjustment risks disrupting the balance in modes like Arena and significantly impacting gameplay. Maybe they saw the video with the Kefra win, and also they don't wanted this pay-to-win perception. So this is something that they didn't really want, so now we see some changes. Then they also talk about Celestial and Hypergen heroes that are inherently harder to progress due to their higher resource demands. So this was also a problem. They didn't really want you to feel forced to just like focus on one single hero, which I noticed that for myself. I was like, if they introduce that now, do you even go for the twins when they release in Season 3? Or do you go for your Harak and use your Stellar Crystals to maybe bring that Harak to P3 or P4? And they really didn't want that, so they kind of now have this third change right here to bring Celestial and Hypergen heroes with a little bit less investment, more in line with normal heroes. So that is the idea, and we're going to take a look at that in this second. And the last part, they say that they want to focus more on Pioneer testing in the future. They initially brought this to the VN server, which for many brought the concern, or raised the concern, that this was like already a global thing and a global patch. The VN server is kind of like a hybrid between like a test server and like a global server. They get updates a little bit early, so it is intended a little bit to test, but it's fairly global already, if you understand what I mean. Pioneer server, however, is an entirely separate game version and regularly gets reset, so it's not like if they introduce something to there, then that's a thing. So maybe like Pioneer testing would have been appropriate to this, though at the time when they first talked about this, the Pioneer server wasn't online, so that's another thing. Then we have this Reddit post by user Indiana Crash. Paragon changes have been toned down, and he posted the graphic here by Chippy AFK, which were the initial ones that we looked at yesterday. The initial update with the 18 increase here, 18, 18, 6, 6, 7, 7, and then we have Inspiration of 7 and Intimidation of 7, capping out at 36 Inspiration on Paragon 4, and Indiana Crash added the new numbers to it, which is very cool. Paragon 4 we don't have right now, because the only server where this update is live is the Pioneer server, and Pioneer, the highest one that you can have right now is like Paragon 2. So you can only check out the Paragon 3 stats, but not the Paragon 4 stats yet. We will know this tomorrow. So for now, the best comparison we can take is to take a look at Paragon 3 and compare it with Paragon 2. And with Paragon 3 before. So we see the normal stats are now the same as before. This will probably be the same for Paragon 4. And we see we have the reduced inspiration right here, 4, 9, 13. Used to be 7, 14, 25. So almost 50% reduced here on Paragon 3. This is like 4, then plus 5, then we have plus 4. So interestingly enough, we see a big increase from Paragon 1 to 2 and then a small increase to Paragon 3, which kind of is a little bit confusing, because before this was the other way around. We saw 7 here and then 11 to Paragon 30, Paragon 3, which was their way of like making Paragon 3 and 4 more important. Now Paragon 2 is apparently the bigger difference than 3, so that is a little bit weird here, honestly. Back to see what Paragon 4 will be, but overall seeing 13 there is almost a 50% reduction to those stats. Taking into account that their idea was to buff support heroes, the question still remains whether they have achieved this. Let's take a look maybe at some gameplay. Here, for example, we have the Lumont team that we used to beat Techies yesterday, and here is the same team that we also fought, and we can compare how this works out. So let's take a look at this battle. Keep in mind, by the way, and that was somehow confused by some people, somehow Lumont is better than I thought. I don't know. But I tested this team like on the global server as well, and somehow Lumont does pretty decently well when you just like use him as a mainly buffed hero. For some reason that works fairly well. And I see some difference here already. We had the ult counter on the Hugin, followed by an ult counter on the Coco. That one we usually didn't get. The Lumont's still super tanky. We still get a bunch of ults, but we also have to keep in mind this team really doesn't counter our team too much. There could be way much more disruption, while we counter the enemy Telene, for example, a whole lot more. We still end up with a pretty major shield, but we get the ult on the Coco, on the Smokey now after 62 seconds, which used to be, I think, 77. So quite the difference right there. So overall, a little bit weaker. Nonetheless, we have still a 2 Paragon difference here, which is still quite major and quite a lot. but still a lot of damage there. A little bit lower heals. Maybe we can compare to the stats from yesterday. Okay, here I got the recording of the entire fight. That was basically yesterday. Same fight against the same team with the same heroes, just after the patch in which we got the nerf of those stats. And starting off, we can take a look. Pretty massive energy gains here, I want to note. Get the counter on the Hugin that we saw before. Smokey does his ult, and yeah, we actually get the Coco ult because his Lily May couldn't keep up. In the fight that we saw right now, his Lily May already countered our Coco. So we even get the second Hugin ult right there before we got that. And we were attacked by this team is already nearly entirely dead at this point, which is crazy. Got another counter there, and we have to see, this was 67 seconds again, so really no change there on the Smokey, interestingly enough. So, quite interesting. Stat-wise, not too different really, but in the way this fight worked out with the Coco ult, we see that the enemy had much more energy regeneration than now, or way less energy regeneration than now, and was able to get way quicker to the ult with the Lily May and counter our Coco ult, which can be very important actually. So we can swap a little bit between the two stats, but it's really hard to see because the influence of the inspiration and intimidation often leads to different fights, or fights going a little bit different. Because if I change now to like the stats that we just had in the post-patch fight, we see that the damage sources are a lot different. We see that Coco did a little bit of damage. We see that a lot of damage came from Ludovic. And that is basically just the fight going way different. So quite interesting in that regard. But we see we got like some damage from Smokey here. This was mainly because, well, our Smokey didn't get countered. We got our Coco ult countered because the Lily May of the enemy was faster. It's interesting because you might interpret that as like being bad, because we got like no Smokey ult on the other one, we got Smokey damage here. It's just like that his Lily May performed better, and that is the reason we got the Smokey ult and got Mythic Plus damage. So like really weird in that sense, and it has a lot of like unexpected things that can result from this. So the question really is here, well, is this good? In my opinion, well, it is a change. It makes it a little bit easier for Paragon to compete. I had techies actually try a lot of teams. He tried like tons of fights. Look at that, he has 26 successful defenses. I said that team like 15 minutes ago or something. Take a look at that. And he tried different teams. He asked me to set up this team, I have to say. I didn't want to torture him, but he wanted to fight Bonnie. So yeah, that's the thing. And if this is now enough, it remains a matter of testing. It is certainly now easier for the enemy to compete against a higher Paragon team. He's definitely had some success against the teams that I used, and I get though that the general community sentiment seems to be that they just don't like those inspiration and intimidation stats. Personally, I have to say I like the idea of having support heroes perform a little bit better, giving them a major role in the fight, having like a Hugin or something give a huge shield out because he has an inspiration buff at the moment. And I kind of like how this goes. I honestly, I think it's okay. Like from the testing that I did on the Pioneer server, and we did hundreds of fights in the last days, I don't think it will be bad. I don't think it will be bad. So I really like this buff to the support heroes right there. I'm not too sure if I had to talk about one part. Oh, they made this actually English now. Where they the part that I'm not too sure about is this buff effects part. Because I see that could sometimes have really weird effects, but it's also a matter of testing. Yeah, I don't know about the buff effects part, but we'll see about this. I mean, it makes sense. Those are in general the things you get from support heroes. Healing effects, shield value, extra energy gains like from like a Roan. Even though like the major part that we see is not just like the natural energy gain, not like from a Roan. And I asked people if they would be happy if they just like deleted the energy gains and the buff effects from this and just made it heal effects and shield value. And people in the Analytica Discord were quite split about it. So I'm not too sure. We can take a look at the community thoughts about this as well. Back on Reddit here. Let's scroll a little bit down because we have some comments here. The issue is not the values. Phoenix says the 2 new stats not only buff allies inspiration, but I also nerf the opponent's intimidation. Debuffing to, opponents is an entire hero kit and its own. Now they just give it to all heroes for ascension to Paragon. Yes, as a team thing. Like the thing is, the intimidation debuffs basically the entire enemy team and reduces the inspiration stats somehow, sometimes becoming negative if you have a Paragon advantage. The thing is, of course, the other stats do that too. So like damage boost, damage reduction, energy or regen reduction. When you hit an enemy, he has reduced energy regen from it. That is also a debuff, of course. So they do that too, just not on a whole team perspective, but on the single hero that gets hit, or a single hero that you target has the debuff. So there is a difference in that, and I think that is what Phoenix wanted to refer to. It's just not really the debuffing part that is the problem in there. Let's now to the next one. Yeah, but they will keep those stats. I'm not especially against it, and Paragon needed to buff to be meaningful, but how those stats work isn't the right way. Should have buffed the Paragon hero, not having stat that buff the whole team and debuff the whole opposing team. So situation hopeful here really pointed that out, what I just said about this comment. Yeah, it is the difference is really debuffing the whole team, while the other Paragon stats just are a thing between the hero that you hit usually and the hero that has the stats. So that is like a change. I can kind of understand that if you want to make support heroes meaningful, it kind of has to work a little bit different. Though we certainly argumented about many different things. Like one perspective that we said was like, what if they would just remove the intimidation and kept the inspiration, so you would profit from higher shields? And the counter argument was, well, if you can't counter the enemy's inspiration, then we are going to have super sustain teams that just have super high heals and super high shields and are just unbreakable in that sense, and you can build like invincible defensive teams, and that is true as well. Then we have True Proposal 9613. My only problem was with Intimidation and Inspiration. If they kept everything as is with the X buff and Paragon buffs, but no Inspiration and Intimidation, I wouldn't care that much. Those two stats, however, are horrible game design. I think it's fair to say that you don't like those stats. That is certainly a thing that can. I think it's a little bit sad that not everybody can test them right now, but of course that would require a global release. I don't think they are that bad at the moment. And you shouldn't underestimate the old stats. Actually, this buff to the old stats, where they had like 90 and had like 50% buffs on nearly everything here, and that was also quite meaningful. And the damage boost from 24 to 36, you would have certainly noticed if a Harak hit you with that higher damage boost. That was a difference. Still quitting if this hits live servers. Yeah, I mean, you can quit, of course, at any point when you don't like it, but keep in mind this affects 2 game modes in the game. We get play your own way in the next update, where you can decide on which game modes you want to do. If PvP does no longer really work for you, and PvP was like a major thing, yeah, I think it's bad. But I already saw in all the testing that you can still go with PvP and have a great time. So I think that won't be a thing. Still a solution seeking a problem. I mean, okay. I think they kind of stated what the problem was and what they wanted to solve with it. It's good and all, but not enough. Even with the change, the Paragon changes are still way too strong to completely turn the game on its head. I think when people try it, they will notice that this is not the case. So yeah, the community is still pretty split about it, and I think a little bit afraid of the inspiration and intimidation charms without any way to properly test them themselves. I think they seem a little bit more powerful than they are. We yesterday, of course, didn't really do a good job at taking those fears away by demonstrating how you can beat teams with Kefra. Yeah, this is like, yeah, I mean, wasn't probably the best way to show it, even though it was a fun way, but I thought this team was great, so I wanted to take a look at it. And yeah. But there was one last thing that they also mentioned in the buffs, and I want to take a little bit of a way back to that. Point number 3, you will be able to increase the rivalry stats for Celestial and Hypergen heroes after upgrading them to Supreme Plus. The boosted stats for Celestial and Hypergen heroes upgrade to Paragon 4 will now align with those of Paragon Plus 4 heroes from other factions. So what does that mean? So if we take a look at the game, I actually don't have a Supreme Plus Celestial Hypergen hero, but we can a little bit cheese it here in the collections. If we now take a look at this Teline, which is a Supreme Plus Teline, and we take a look at the stats, we notice they have rivalry stats now. Actually, they basically have the base rivalry stats that you would otherwise see on a Paragon 1 hero, on a Paragon 1 normal hero, with just like one stat that is a little bit lower. The energy regen reduction that would usually be 15, and energy on hit would be 15, but the rest are really the same as on a Paragon 1 hero. So you now start getting rivalry stats at Supreme Plus, making basically Celestial and Hypergen heroes stronger at lower investment. So that is something that they introduced with it. So you don't really need to invest and get to Paragon 1 to make use of those stats. So if you have a Supreme Plus Celestial Hypergen hero right now, they will be stronger after the update, especially in comparison to like Paragon 1 heroes, because those, and I think this was a little bit missed by a lot of people for the moment, actually the Paragon heroes now have entirely different scaling stats and rivalry stats compared to their non-Paragon heroes, because on the second one we now see 25 at Paragon 1, 25, 25, 10, and then 7, 7, and then it goes to 37, 15, and 11. For a normal hero, Paragon 1 would be 15, 15, 6, and 4, and Paragon 2 would be 30, and then 12 and 9. So they are higher a little bit on those levels. And then we get to Paragon 3, which we also can take a look at. And on Paragon 3, we are here at 48, which would be 45 on Paragon 3 normally. And then we have 19, which would be 18. And then 14 on Inspiration and Imitation, which would be 13. So you can see it's kind of higher on those lower Paragon levels, and then scales back to the amount that you would have on normal heroes on Paragon 4. So Paragon 4 is like expected to be the same as for normal heroes then. That is what they essentially said, which is weird. I don't know. Like, it's good for lower spenders, because, well, you now profit from Paragon buffs starting from Supreme Plus, which is of course nice. But considering we talked about the whole thing of making Paragon 4 more interesting, the way this now works out is that the increase to the Paragon stats gets lower once you near Paragon 4, making Paragon 4 a less good upgrade than Supreme Plus. So like, not in the sense of overall power, but the boost that you get on Supreme Plus, where you unlock a new ability and get Paragon stats, is of course higher than now when you get to Paragon 4, where you just get a minor stat increase and a low increase to your gain of like the Paragon stats on the rivalry stats. So I don't know, it's a little bit weird. You can get your own ideas about it. We reached AFK stage 150. If somebody needs a pop-up. And yeah, I don't hate it. I think it will be good for most players. Many players have Supreme Plus Celestial Hypergen heroes. Those will now be stronger in PvP. You need less investment to use them in PvP. So overall, I guess a good thing. But very weird. So tell me your opinion about everything down in the comments below. And with that, I wish you a great day and we'll see us in the next one.